but she had changed her lifestyle, and that is just magnificent. And then fasting can be a kickoff.
Hello and welcome, everybody. I have the big pleasure of speaking today to Martien van Houten, who used to be a doctor at Buchinger Wilhelmi and my personal first fasting doctor in the clinic. So it's a very, very great pleasure. Nice to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
And we have also a very interesting topic, which is fasting and body weight. And I know this is one of your favorite topics. So can you directly maybe just give us an introduction about how fasting has an impact on body weight?
I'll try, and you can interrupt. So fasting and body weight, obviously body weight changes when you change habits, when you change your eating habit and probably also your movement habit, maybe your medication, which is not a habit, but something you have to do, it all changes and it is reflected in the weight. I really want to state that weight loss is not, to fast for weight loss is not really such a good idea, although it can be the kickoff to a good weight loss state. And obviously we know most of us are obese or have been obese, and so it is a very, very important topic. But to completely think that you solve the problem of weight just by going into a fast is rubbish, really. That's why it's a good topic to talk about, because on the other hand, and we'll come to that probably later, is the fact that once you've stopped fasting, and fasting is something we do periodically, and it has a beginning and a middle and an end, and really the key of it is how to end the fasting and what happens then. And that isn't always predictable, but we need to talk about that also.
So you were talking now about the very end of the fast, but another very important moment is the beginning of the fast. And maybe you can explain a little bit about this and what happens in the body with especially the relationship to the body weight.
Yeah, so this is what everybody is really curious about, like how will it function for me? And we tend to want success at that point, and that's a bit tricky. So we need to think that through. First of all, you might be a bit anxious, so there might be cortisol and stress levels, which influence the retention of water. Water is the key at the start of the fast. Obviously, you're not eating and you're emptying your bowel, so you have less feces, so that might be 0.5 kilo or so in weight difference. Might be. It depends how you've prepared yourself. If the body is well prepared, then you will find it very easy to empty the bowel at the start of the fast. Some people do enemas, some people take a laxative. That's something you discuss with the doctor if you do it in a clinical setting, because if you do it very abruptly, then that might not be ideal for the blood pressure, etc. So this is a whole, ritual, I'm going to call it. And some people hate the idea of an enema. I can tell you there are other ways to do it. Don't be put off because of that. But it's a cleansing from the naturopathic side that is taken into this method that we did at the Buchinger Wilhelmi clinic. So the water is also eliminated, not just by the gut, but also in the urine and by the breathing and by the skin. And that makes a difference. And men tend to lose quickly a lot of water. So I know from experience, I have a couple who are both fasting, and the man will come in and on his little chart, he can show that he has lost 2 kilos on the first day or in the first 2 days. And then the woman might be extremely frustrated because she has only lost 300 grams or 400 grams. And she did the same thing and she feels life is unfair. It's very variable, and it's mainly related to the water household at the start of the fast. The metabolic changes are happening at that time because we need water for metabolic changes, for metabolism as a whole. And we might have changed our habits already a little bit, but the proof of the pudding, if you want to put it, comes after a few days.
Yeah, I can fully relate to the reduced weight loss in the beginning. It's the same with me. And when I fast like in a group and men are part of the group, then normally it's exactly what you were explaining. You were briefly touching upon the topic of the metabolic change. Since you're a doctor, maybe you can explain a little bit what happens during the metabolic switch in the body in this phase.
Yeah, that's a really important and also very complicated process. I'm going to keep it simple, basically because I don't pretend to understand it all. And more importantly, keep things simple for yourself so that you feel safe within what you're thinking. And I can give you some ideas. So we have in all foods that we eat, you could divide them down into sugars, which are called in a fancy way carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And then there is water. And then, of course, there are minerals and special minerals and elements and metals, rare metals. I'm not going to go into that at the moment. But so let's stick to carbohydrates or sugars, proteins, and fats. Now, in the body, when we stop eating, or at least stop taking in a lot of food, especially carbohydrates, now this is my wording, the fasting little demon, he will start looking for any spare sugars. The point being that sugars get used for quick energy. So you have a sort of cleanup of all the sugars, the quick energy within the body. And that takes a day or two, and it depends very much on your previous blood sugar level. And obviously for diabetic people, the same thing happens, but there's more sugar to clean up. So I know this is very simple, but let's just keep it at that. So the sugars is one element. Then we have the proteins. Now, there are videos, there's a lot of research about proteins and fasting. Just take it from me, there is no useful protein loss in fasting. We always have a turnover of the proteins, but you do not lose muscle mass in fasting. So we can just forget about this chapter. And we go to the fats, because fasting in a way is all about sugars and fats. So the fats, they are a storage. In other words, they take more energy to make, and they take a lot more energy to be burnt. In fact, you need 10 times approximately more oxygen to burn an entity of fat than to burn an entity of sugar. So that means we need to work at that. It takes more time, and this is also where movement comes in, and we'll come back to movement. So what we call the metabolic switch is when we've sort of more or less terminated looking for sugars, and the little demon can't find any. He won't go into the proteins as long as we move a bit, sort of not interested, I'm going to say in my simple terms, and move to the fat. Now, there are lots of different forms of fat. There's a lot of research going on there, but he will get to the fat after about 2 or 3 days. And once we start burning fat, then we produce ketone bodies, and you can document that. And that might be rewarding also if you're losing less weight than somebody you're competing with, which is your own problem, that you can see that you're getting into the ketosis. And that then you are really in what we call the metabolic fasting mode. And that we know has immense health, anti-aging, but especially detox effects.
Thank you for the explanation. The ketone bodies can be measured with the so-called keto sticks, because I can assume some people might be interested. You were already referring briefly about the importance of movement, and I think that is really something we could spend a couple of sentences on. Can you give some recommendations on what role movement plays, especially when it comes to fasting and body weight?
Yeah, well, it's central. And movement is primal in our life. And I'm just going to philosophize for one little minute because it's interesting. Some children enjoy moving, some children don't. Some people grow up in a culture where you say, go out for a run, go and play tag outside, and that's something normal to do. And in other cultures, maybe through climate or whatever, children don't move. So movement is something which your metabolism has been influenced by right from the start. And I think we should stop thinking about laziness or being, it's your own fault or whatever. The question is, can I relate to movement and fun and enjoyment? Now, this topic comes back in fasting. So, okay, when we move, we warm up and we need energy and we burn energy. And sugar is one of the first things, but it doesn't stay on very long. And that's why if you eat a lot of sugars, usually you have a big flush of energy and children can get hyperactive and very excited, and then a big collapse. And during the collapse of the energy, you sort of feel I'm lacking something, so you would take some more sugars. Now, the movement can prevent that because you can start enjoying burning your fats, as it were, to get the energy you need. The fasting requires movement. If you lie in bed, then you will lose a little bit of muscle mass, but that has nothing to do with the fasting. What we need is to move but not be stressed. And that is different for everybody. And we need to enjoy also changing our habit maybe and discover maybe new things. So the very start of fasting is a little bit tiring, and you might have a bit of a headache, and you might not feel that you want to do the biggest walk on the first few days. After that, things get easier, and it is good to do different types of movement, which means that you want to do something like a walk. You want to do maybe something like flexibility, yoga, Pilates, maybe even some weights. And you want to do a little bit of getting out of breath. You could call it cardio, but not too much. And you want to de-stress and associate, and this is one of my hobby horses, the movement with the setting. I had a lovely patient who came from Beirut, from the city, and she'd never seen a sunrise. And she went with the clinic on a morning walk, and she came back completely euphoric because she'd had this walk and seen a sunrise. She wasn't overweight, but it just showed me that through getting into a new movement habit, you can discover the world new. So that is really important, and that is going to be one of the key factors at the end of this fast to what happens to your weight. So sorry about being a bit long.
Thank you very much for the explanation, because I think that is not only a very interesting but also a very important topic, and might be also kind of a surprise to many who are watching our videos, that movement is so important and we recommend it strongly in fasting. And what you were describing with the yoga, the daily walks, and also the running is kind of how my days normally are when I'm fasting in the clinic, because I feel so energetic. And that was to me also the biggest surprise, because I hadn't fasted in a proper setting beforehand. And when I did it at home, I always was kind of tired. It was always during work, and it was more like a stress. And so that was really very interesting for me, and it gave so much. And I was always looking also, what can I do next? And so the energy was really amazing. But everybody's individually, it's different for everybody. That's what you said already beforehand. And also most likely the weight loss is very individual. Maybe can you give some advice or some information about how is that different, and what are the factors that make it different for everybody? Why are like some people losing very quickly and some very slowly? So that because maybe people would, and I know these questions are coming in quite often, how long do I have to fast to lose 5 kilograms, for example? I know this is anyway not the right approach, but just so you could get a little bit of a feeling of what are the factors that make it very individual to me.
Right. So just to repeat that, it is very individual. I had patients who came with Excel tablets and who plotted every day and were frustrated or proud, whatever, but usually it's not linear. So to weigh every day, which is a sort of ritual, has a side of being fun, but I think is also not very helpful often. Obviously, you want to know what's going on. The question of, doctor, how much weight am I going to lose, is the question I hate the most because it's difficult. On the whole, you could say that between, and this is conservative, women tend to lose or can lose in a classical fast 200, 300 grams a day. Now, I'm making it conservative because if you look that way, it can really be permanent that way. Men, a little bit more, maybe 400. Now, this is very much influenced by firstly, the movement, stress, and also hormonally. And one thing which I think we should talk about again at another stage is also the question, how did, in the case of overweight, how did the overweight come about? And we know now that there are so many genetic or epigenetic, then feeding reasons, but especially also hormonal reasons, why it can be so individual, that I think you should realize I can't program it. And it is not always to do with my willpower, because people feel responsible and they think they're a culprit for not getting it done. And that's not the case. I think that's the wrong attitude. So the hormonal side and also the psychological side are really important. As I said before, the proof of the pudding is what happens afterwards, after you have re-alimentated properly.
And this is also part of my last question. Also, we get this quite often. What about the yo-yo effect, the so-called? Could you also explain a little bit what factors play a role, and is it like existing, the yo-yo effect, or what is your observation during your experience working as a doctor?
Yeah, at the end, remind me, I can give you some examples, but they're always individual examples. Now, the yo-yo effect is just a name, and it is nothing specifically defined except that it means after having lost weight, you put on weight again. And the yo-yo, like a toy yo-yo, means often it comes back more than what you were at the start. And that obviously is not a reason to fast and is totally frustrating. And the question is why? Now, I think I would get the Nobel Prize if I really knew why, but there are a lot of indications. Firstly, and I've talked about this before, fasting has to do with habits. And we are programmed 80% or more through habits. Thank God. I mean, just think if we had to consider every move we make, the moment I open the door, how do I use the door handle? No, it's all on automatic pilot. But within those habits, there are excellent habits, but there are also some not so good habits. And there are habits that are in the mind, but also habits that have become completely physical. And the theme of addiction is another important theme that we should talk about at some stage. So what I'm really saying is, if I go back to my, I'm going to say nicely, not so good habits as far as metabolism is concerned, after the fast, then the chances are I will put on weight and might even put on more weight. Because maybe the little demon that I was talking about before sort of feels he has to catch up. Don't really ask me the metabolic details. There are ideas, and sugar metabolism and diabetes obviously plays an important role. Insulin plays an important role in all this. So that's the eating habit, the movement habit we've talked about, and then there is the drinking habit. And I mean basically water. Obviously there are many, many drinks, including alcohol, which are addictive, but which also contain a hell of a lot of sugar. And that I think you can change quite easily. I'm not so much talking about alcoholism now, that's a chapter in itself, obviously needs help. But I had a nice young patient from the Arab world, and he was very overweight, and he joined us at that time we had the junior program. And a year later, he came back with the weight with which he had left the clinic. And I was so amazed and proud of him, and he was really proud. And I asked him what he had changed. And he was a student, he's a medical student, so he was working hard and still enjoying seeing his friends. And in those countries, often you sit around and eat and drink, seeing friends. And he said the only thing he changed is he had stopped soft drinks. Oh. Now that I as you see, I still get excited about that because I think it's a wonderful example of breaking things down to what can I change to prevent getting back into the completely same habits at the end of the fast. So that's one thing. And maybe just if I can give you one more example. So you really ask the question, what can I do for overweight? And I am a real fanatic about fasting, but on the other hand, I think it's also important when it might not be better not to fast or do a short fast. I have a patient in my mind now, a woman, she was an academic, so again, that was a lot of sitting, and she'd been fighting with her weight most of her life. She was post-menopausal, this is important. If we talk about yo-yo also, it's important. And we decided that the fasting, even 3 weeks of fasting, had not helped on the long term. So she came and she fasted for 1 week. And then she spent the rest of the time going into a low-calorie, nice diet, which she learned to cook. And she enjoyed movement because she was full of energy. And she realized and had the time in the clinic, so still within the sort of framework that she was looking for, of feeling that she did not have joint pains or various symptoms from the overweight were reduced. So that was extremely motivating. Then she went home for, I think, 8 weeks, because we can kid ourselves that we can keep going with a change of habit for a year. You can't. We're all human. And she had decided 8 weeks she could handle at home, cooking all those things and going shopping. It changes life, and maybe doing differently at a party and seeing friends, different habits, doesn't mean to say you can't be social. And then she came back after 8 weeks and she'd lost a little bit of weight. So this, we progressed, and then she went for 3 months, and then she went for 6 months, and then I hadn't seen her for a year, but she had changed her lifestyle, and that is just magnificent. And then fasting can be a kickoff. And the fact that you can control yourself is fulfilling. And basically, I think it works on your self-esteem. And then you have a little bit of motivation to change things.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I know from a talk with another doctor who says it's not the 2 weeks patients are with us who are changing, especially the weight in the long run, but the 50 weeks they are not with us, where habits need to be changed to really have a long-term effect. And also, to my knowledge, the Buchinger Wilhelmi Clinics published a study which shows that 1/3, if they come to lose weight, 1/3 continues the weight loss journey, 1/3 keeps the weight stable, and 1/3 keeps gaining back weight. I can link that in the description if somebody's interested to check the study.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. That was a very interesting talk. I hope you also found it beneficial. Please follow our channel if you are interested in more information about fasting. If you have questions, then put them below. We might answer them in one of the next videos. And I wish you a nice day. Thank you very much once again. It was so nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It was good to be here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.